Welcome to the Inside Elections podcast, where we analyze elections in a nonpartisan, data-driven, and accessible way. In this episode, we'll talk about recent race ratings changes in the fights for control of the House and the Senate. And we'll talk with legendary political journalist Judy Woodruff about anchoring election nights, moderating debates, and what she sees in this unique election cycle. Buckle up. I'm Jacob Rubashkin, Deputy Editor of Inside Elections, the go-to place for nonpartisan political analysis for more than 40 years. And I'll be spending election night in New York's 12th Congressional District on the Upper West Side, represented by Democrat Jerry Nadler, working behind the scenes with ABC News on their election night decision desk team.
And I'm Nathan Gonzales, editor and publisher of Inside Elections, former backup quarterback for the Dallas Dragons. And I'll be spending election night in Virginia's 2nd District, represented by Republican Jen Kiggins. I'll be on air with CBN News in Virginia Beach. So, and Jacob, I'm excited for you. I got a chance to do ABC for 7 elections doing what you're doing, and I'm excited that you get to do it.
Yeah, I am excited too. Always enjoy spending some time on the Upper West Side, though perhaps not as competitive a congressional district as you will be in Virginia's 2nd District. But, you know, that 12th District did see a pretty contentious primary 2 years ago on the Democratic side between Representative Jerry Nadler, the winner, and his colleague Carolyn Maloney. Because, of course, as listeners of this podcast, I'm sure know, in the redistricting that New York did following the 2020 census, the Upper West Side and the Upper East Side used to be different congressional districts. They are very different places. Central Park is a big dividing line here. But when they were smushed together, Nadler got the better of that fight. So certainly a lot of political history there, if not a top-tier congressional race like in Virginia's 2nd District.
And I'm going to have to avoid the temptation the election morning or election day when there really isn't a lot going on. We're just waiting to find the nearest precinct and talk about how many people are in line and what that means for the rest of the night, because I do not think that those anecdotes are usually very fruitful, but I'll be there. Yeah, we have it as tilt Republican, and we're all going to be watching those Virginia districts early in the night, because we should know results early in the night, whether it's in the 2nd or the 7th District, as an indicator of which way the night might be headed, particularly in the fight for the House. So, yeah, it's hard to believe the election is this close.
Yeah, we're recording this on Friday morning, and that's 11 days before Election Day.
I'm just trying to take it. I'm trying to survive each day right now,
correct?
day by day.
Yeah, well, I've started to make plans for next March, which feels like just a totally fancy fantasy land. But there is a life after elections, which is something we all ought to remind ourselves.
Yes, a different pace. A different pace is good.
We made race ratings changes in 8 House races and 1 Senate race in the most recent issue of the newsletter. We're going to talk through all of them. We'll start in the Senate. We moved Nebraska yet again toward Democrats or independents. We'll get into that. But the rating changed from likely Republican to lean Republican. So 1 click less favorable to Deb Fischer, the incumbent senator. Let's take a quick listen at a recent campaign ad from her opponent, independent candidate Dan Osborne.
Washington changed Deb Fischer.
He got 10 times richer while in office.
And lied to us about the deficit, the border, and her term limit promise.
I'm a Republican, and I'm voting for Dan Osborne.
I'm voting for Dan Osborne, and I'm voting for Donald Trump.
A true independent, Dan Osborne.
Dan Osborne will secure the border, take care of farmers, take care of workers, and put Nebraska first.
They hate it, so they're spending millions lying about him. But they don't know Nebraska. We're not going to fall for their lies.
Nathan, we sat down with Dan Osborne gosh, 6 months ago, 7 months ago, at the beginning of the year, at a moment when this race was not on anyone's radar, including, quite frankly, ours. And in the intervening time, it has become one of the hottest and strangest Senate races on the map. What changed and why is this ruby red Cornhusker state that hasn't sent a Democrat to the Senate since 2006 and Ben Nelson? Why are we talking about it all of a sudden?
Yeah, I admit I was a little bit dismissive, not because Osborne was that he wasn't a serious person, but it all looked good on paper, but it just didn't look like it was going to happen in reality. And this is a good example of why you, as political prognosticators, we should be open minded and not make up our mind that something's going to happen 7 months before the election and then never change our mind, because the dynamics of this race are closer to what they said it was going to be. And I think you have a dynamic where, again, Democrats did not nominate a candidate. They're getting behind Osborne as the independent, and Osborne, as a mechanic and a local labor leader, and he's got tattoos. He doesn't look like a politician, and he's tapping into an anti-establishment, anti-politician sentiment. Meanwhile, Senator Fisher has not really done herself any favors in terms of her presence in the state. Her fundraising has been mediocre for a U.S. senator that is up in the cycle. And so Republicans have had to scramble. They've had to they're spending money in Nebraska where they much rather would have had spent that money elsewhere. And what's concerning to me, not from I don't care who wins, but the two parties have very different outlooks on where the race stands today. Republicans believe that the race has been corrected and Fisher is now in the lead. Democrats believe Osborne is either running even or ahead of Fisher. And I don't think it's as simple as, well, just average those two out. I feel like one party has the pulse on this race and one party is wrong. And I'm not sure yet which party that is.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how the results shake out. We still clearly see Fisher as favored. I think there is a long history of candidates trying to do what Osborne has done, Democrats trying to do what Osborne has done, and rally behind an independent candidate in a Republican-leaning state that ultimately does a lot better than the Democrat would have, but
Right.
fails to get across the finish line. That's, each of those races has been different. I think Osborne is running a slightly different spin on that than like an Al Gross in Alaska or Evan McMullen in Utah, but it's a tough hill to climb. But it's not something that we should rule out as a possibility. And I think that the other interesting thing to me is just I don't think I've ever seen a Senate campaign release as many internal polls from different pollsters as
Yeah.
the Osborne campaign. Clearly, this is a media strategy that they have tapped into, that they've realized if they just put out a poll every week, even if it's from a pollster that's not as high quality or rigorous as kind of the top tier of political polling, they'll get media attention. It can probably juice their fundraising and keep the focus on a race that had been in the background before. So we might see other candidates pick up on that strategy, long shot candidates pick up on that tactic moving forward if Osborne is successful.
Yeah. Yeah. I think they realize there are skeptics either in the media or the political analyst world or on the Democratic side, and they want Democratic support, or they need Democratic support, particularly on the airwaves to help put out a message that's different than what Republicans are trying to do.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be a surprise. Now, if Osborne wins, this will not qualify as a surprise because everyone is talking about it.
Yeah.
There's millions of dollars being spent. So there probably will be a surprise, but Osborne should not be. It would be an upset, I would still say, but not a surprise.
Yeah.
We also made rating changes in 8 House races. Subscribers already know this, but Jacob, for everybody else, list those off and let's talk about a few.
Yeah, so we made a whole bunch of House ratings changes, most of them in Democrats' direction, but a few in Republicans' direction. So in Democrats' direction, we moved California's 13th district, Congressman John Duarte, a Republican, out of toss-up into tilt Democratic. That would be a flip. In California's 45th district, we moved Republican Michelle Steele from tilt Republican into toss-up. In Nevada's 4th district, we moved Democrat Stephen Horsford from likely Democratic off the board to solid Democratic. In New York's 19th district, we moved Republican Mark Molinaro's race from tilt Republican to toss-up. In New York's 22nd district, we moved New York Republican Brandon Williams from tilt Democratic, where he was already an underdog, to lean Democratic, because he's an even more of an underdog now. And in Ohio's 13th district, we moved Democrat Amelia Sykes from tilt Democratic to lean Democratic. So those were the race ratings in favor of Democrats. In favor of Republicans, we moved California's 47th district, which is an open seat left vacant by, or left open by Congresswoman Katie Porter, from tilt Democratic to toss-up. And in Texas's 34th district, we moved Congressman Vicente Gonzalez, a Democrat, from likely Democratic to lean Democratic.
And which I won't ask you to choose your favorite out of all those, or the one, but which one is most notable to you? And then I'll pick one as well.
Well, Nathan, you know my favorite race was New York's 19th district, so it is among this bunch, and I think that was a race rating change that we had talked about for a little while. Was one that we could probably kind of see on the horizon, given the fundraising disparity between those two candidates and the polling. There was a public poll out recently from a local station up in upstate New York that showed Riley with about a 4-point lead over Molinaro. He is showing, polls in the race these days tend to have it very close, or with Riley in a slight advantage. So that race seemed destined for toss-up, arguably since Molinaro won it by about 2,100 votes 2 years ago. So that is my favorite race for a number of reasons. But I would have to say of this bunch, the one that really stands out is California 13, because this is a flip, and flips are ultimately what we're all trying to assess here. Our goal is to determine which party is going to have a majority and by how many seats. So it's a big deal whenever we take an incumbent and say that they're an underdog, and that's what we did with John Duarte in California's Central Valley. So all of these race ratings are important, but that one to me stands out among the bunch as the most notable, because Democrats need a net gain of 4 seats to win back the House majority, and this is another one. We already have them favored in New York 22 and in Nebraska's 2nd district. Now we have them favored in California's 13th district. We've got a Louisiana seat and a Alabama seat already on the board for them. That's +5. But on the Republican side, we have 3 likely flips in North Carolina. So drop Democrats down to +2. Democrats need 2 more seats, 2 more Republican seats to come out of that toss-up category into their column to get them to the threshold of looking good for the majority again. And so that's why I think California 13 is the most notable race here.
And our overall range, Jacob, you mentioned Democrats need +4, net gain of 4. Our overall range right now is anything from a Democratic gain of 9 seats to a Republican gain of 6 seats. Now, that range is a little bit wider than what I would like, but I'm hoping that as we get to our final pre-election issue, which we'll put out on Halloween, don't be scared, that we can push some of the toss-ups into tilt categories. We're not in the camp that you have to push all of the races out of toss-up, but that'll narrow that range a little bit. And right now, if we're ranking how certain we are about outcomes in the 2024 elections, a Republican-controlled Senate, I think, is the most. It's not a guarantee, but it's the most certain compared to the race for the presidency and the U.S. House are both very close and more uncertain than that Senate piece. And I would add that we're entering a pre-election phase where there's sort of a black hole of polling, meaning for those of you listening and watching, Jacob and I, when we're not doing something like this or talking in front of a group of folks, we are begging for data. But there's going to be now a few days where there is no data because either the candidates or the parties or the outside groups or everyone, they stop polling because it is too late to make strategic decisions and changing your TV ads. You just have to go for it. And so that's makes me a little bit uncomfortable because I'd rather have more data to the end, and it's hard to pick up late shifts, but people are not listening to me when they're talking about how to spend their money, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've talked to any number of pollsters in the last couple days who have basically, it's kind of if you watch, cross country or cycling or any sort of race where there are a lot of laps and they ring the bell at the last lap. The bell is ringing right now. Everyone's in the last lap of this election, and everyone's going to be flying blind for the next couple days. I mean, once we get past next Monday, I think is probably the last moment where you can book TV ads for the week, because TV ads work on a Tuesday to Tuesday cycle. Everyone's going to be flying blind. And I think the best thing we can do is embrace that uncertainty. The worst thing you can do is latch on to tiny little disparate or ephemeral pieces of information that are floating out there on Twitter or in kind of word of mouth networks and build a whole worldview out of that, because more often than not, that will lead you astray. Ultimately, you do all of the work. We do all the work in the months leading up to the election so that we can feel decently in this last week. But there's going to be some uncertainty, and there's no way around it. You just got to go through it.
And that's why our ratings in next week's newsletter will be pretty close to final, because there just won't be a lot of data after that to persuade, or to change those ratings, even though technically we could change a rating right up until the end. But I'm really excited about our guest, so let's move on.
I'd like to welcome a very special guest, legendary political journalist and former PBS Newshour anchor, Judy Woodruff. Judy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Before we dive in, what congressional district did you grow up in?
Well, how much time do we have? It's great to be with you, Jacob, and with you, Nathan. I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I had to look this up. That was first district. It is now Oklahoma's first district. We lived in Germany. We came back to the United States, lived at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. That's Missouri 4. We then moved to Red Bank, New Jersey, which is the 6th. Then we moved back to Tulsa, so that was Oklahoma 1. Then 2 years in Taiwan. Then I stayed with my grandparents in Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina. That's the northeastern corner of North Carolina. That's North Carolina's first district. And then I spent the rest of my high school years in Augusta, Georgia, which was Georgia 10. It's now Georgia 12. So, like I said, how much time do you have?
I'm impressed that you did that much homework. We appreciate that.
Yeah.
I had to look it up. I didn't remember all of these.
Yeah. Wow. That's a whole almanac right there. That's why you're the best.
It explains why I'm interested in politics, I think, because I saw so many different parts of the country, except for the West Coast. But growing up, I was used to moving around a lot, and I was interested in every place we lived, including overseas. And I think that probably, played some role eventually in what I decided to do.
And were you more interested initially in journalism or politics, or did those things come together at the same time?
Well, initially it was math, but then I had a math professor in college who didn't basically think women should be taking calculus. So I turned my attention to political science because I had a great political science professor. She encouraged me to switch my major, which I did, fell in love with politics, studied, my major was political science. I worked in Washington for 2 years for my congressman from Georgia's 10th district. It was then Robert G. Stevens he was from Athens, Georgia, but he represented the district where Augusta is. And I was ready to come back to Washington after college. But some of the women I talked to who were working on Capitol Hill, some of whom had law degrees, said, "You're going to be the coffee girl. You're going to be the gopher. Don't come to Washington right away." So I went back to college. I was at Duke my senior year, and I talked to my mentors there, professors. And one of them literally one day said, "Well, did you ever think about covering politics. And it was almost as if the light bulb went off. I had never thought about journalism before then. And mind you, this is the middle of my senior year in college. And so I scrambled to think, what could I do? And of course, I ended up taking an entry-level coffee girl job as the newsroom secretary for the ABC TV affiliate in Atlanta. So I was working in the newsroom. I was exposed to journalists and journalism, but I started out at the very bottom and absolutely fell in love with it. And that's how I ended up in journalism.
And that's amazing, because now, I mean, you've been covering politics, campaigns, elections for more than 50 years. I hope we're allowed to say that.
Absolutely.
And you've been traveling the country recently, still talking with voters in key states. How does this election compare to all the ones that you've covered in the past?
Wow. Well, you're right. I've been traveling the country since early 2023 after I stepped away from the anchor desk at the NewsHour. And we've been to 26 states by now. We've filed some 44, 45 pieces for the NewsHour, long, in-depth pieces. And how it's different is that the country is so divided. And I realize everybody kind of realizes that, but seeing it on the ground is a profound experience. I mean, as you said, I've covered politics, started out in Atlanta, covered Georgia politics, came to Washington in the 1970s, covered the White House. So I've seen Republicans and Democrats. I've covered every election since 1976, Republicans versus Democrats, but I've never seen the public, the people, and the politicians as much at each other's throats as we are today. We are, in some cases, unfortunately, bitterly divided. It's not everybody. There are a lot of people out there who just want to look the other way and say, I don't pay attention. But for those folks who are paying attention, there are some very strong feelings. And I mean, I can cite chapter and verse and give you examples if you're interested. But that is the biggest difference for me. I've never seen the country and the American people as divided as we are right now.
Yeah, I mean, give people a taste of what they should be watching already in some of these pieces that you've done. But what's one that stands out to you?
Well, here's one example. We went to Iowa back in 2023 and sat down with a group of two-time Trump voters. So they had voted for Trump in 2016 and 2020. And among other things, we wanted to ask them, what do you think about people in the other party? This is something that we have asked people all over America. And for example, what would you think if your son or daughter married a Democrat? One woman said, my daughter did. It didn't go well. And then we kind of laughed. And then she said, we're now estranged, which was a reminder of just how painful this divide is. And we then wanted to ask them, do you think it's possible for Democrats to be people of deep faith, to be Christian? In one of these focus groups, not a single person raised their hand. And the reason they gave was they said, we just don't think, we think on the issue of abortion, that it's not possible to be Christian and accept the idea of reproductive rights as Democrats do. And we also don't believe you can change your gender. God knows what you are when you're born, and that's it. And we found this view, not just in Iowa, but in different parts of the country. We were in Illinois, we've been in Tennessee, we've been in the Northeast, we've been in the Southwest. We found Democrats who will argue that Republicans are not educated, they're not informed, that they are part of a cult, that they worship the cult of Donald Trump. I will say that we talked to the Pew Research Center. You all know who they are. They are based in Washington. They do nonpartisan research. They've done it for decades. They asked voters in 2016, Republicans and Democrats, do you think people in the other party are dishonest? In 2016, 47% of the Republicans they asked said most Democrats are dishonest. In 2023, when they asked Republicans the same question, that had shot up to 72%. And there was almost as big, but not quite as big an increase on the part of Democrats' negative view of Republicans. And by the way, I just saw just yesterday the Johns Hopkins folks doing research at Johns Hopkins asked Republicans who thought Trump had won in 2020, do they agree that Democrats are, quote, downright evil? 3/4 of them said they either somewhat or strongly agree Democrats are downright evil. So we've gotten to a place where we not only think the other side is wrong, but we think they're bad human beings and we don't want to have anything to do with them. And it's affecting families, it's affecting neighborhoods, longtime friendships. People talk about losing friends they went to high school or college with, people they've known for their entire lives, losing those friendships. And it's frankly been a painful thing to witness. And there are groups out there trying to fix this, trying to heal us, bring us together. But we've got a long way to go.
Is there anything that makes you hopeful that you found out there?
Yes, and that is that some Americans say that this is just not the way we can continue. That it's gone too far. It's hurting them. It's hurting the people they love. We have to try to find a way through it. And there are now hundreds and hundreds of groups, most of them at the local level, very local, the neighborhood, micro local level, who are trying to get people to sit down across a table, have a cup of coffee, a beer together, to think about ways to even have a conversation so that we can go back to getting to know people by where we grew up and where do you go on vacation and tell me about your family, those kinds of things. When people did more things, you know about the book Bowling Alone.
Yeah.
Robert Putnam, it came out some years ago. It was the beginning of kind of identifying the isolation that many people now experience in America. We are less and less spending time with other people who are different from us. We are moving into neighborhoods where people are just like us. Social media, the internet has made this so much easier. We can just associate with people who have the same education, live in the same part of the country, have the same socioeconomic background, same potentially race and ethnic background, same faith background, and we are separating ourselves. And so work has to be done to get us to think about even listening to somebody on the other side and respecting that somebody could have a different view from us politically, but still be a good person. But now, frankly, I'll just say this finally, that now that politics has become the thing that identifies most of us, or so, not most of it maybe, but many of us, it's harder and harder to separate politics from our identity. Politics has taken over so much of how we judge one another. One of the first things we want to know anymore is, are you a R or a D?
Yeah.
And then we make a judgment about you. And so I am hopeful because I can't believe we're going to go any further down this road. But right now it's we've got our work cut out for us.
Yeah. We are sitting here 11 days away from election night. You have helped lead PBS coverage of election night results for a long time. I'm very curious, kind of what does your preparation look like ahead of election night when you're anchoring this broadcast, or whether you're getting ready for Tuesday night every 4 years? What goes into that for you? What are you bringing to that broadcast in 11 days?
Well, this year I will be one of the folks on the set providing analysis for some of the evening. But in past years, you're right, past election years when I was anchoring, it's all hands on deck. And we would get a huge briefing book, which we have this year as well. And I'm already going through that, even just because there's information in there that I want to remind myself of, remind myself about previous election trends, remind me of small details about the candidates. Not that, they aren't in our faces, if you will, every day now in the media. Still, it's important to be reminded their biographies, and certainly to not just at the presidential level, but at the Senate, House, governor races. All these races are important. We know most of them are not in the House, for example, are not contested, but the ones that are contested, these are really interesting, important races. Both houses hang in the balance. And so there's just so much work to be done to go back over who's running in these districts, who's running for the Senate, what are the issues, who has said what about the issues, how much money has been spent. There's just a ton of homework that needs to be done. And I will tell you this, I've never gone into an election night feeling comfortable. I always go in feeling there is so much more that I don't know than I do know. And I so rely on my colleagues, my producers, our researchers, to make sure I don't say something wrong on the air, because we hate to make mistakes. But there's a whole lot of preparation that goes into it. And just as an American citizen and somebody who cares about and loves this country, I still get goosebumps on election days, election night, as I think about the fact that the American people are collectively speaking and making a decision about who they want to lead the country for the next 4 years. And I know what happened in 2020 kind of turned that on its head, but we righted the ship, and hopefully that's the way we're going to stay.
No. Let's talk about debates, because you've moderated many presidential debates, including one of the most famous debate exchanges, arguably of all time, talking about, of course, the 1988 vice presidential debate between Dan Quayle and Lloyd Bentsen. Let's take a brief listen to that famous exchange.
I have as much experience in the Congress as Jack Kennedy did when he sought the presidency. I will be prepared to deal with the people in the Bush administration if that unfortunate event would ever occur.
Senator Benson.
Senator, I served with Jack Kennedy. I knew Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine. Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy. To be done in a situation like that.
You're only taking time
is to call in the joint.
Your own candidate.
Do you think that Bentsen had that answer ready to go? And did you know at the time just how lasting that moment would be in American political history?
We wondered at the time whether he had prepared, and there has been reporting since then that his campaign was expecting Dan Quayle, to say something like that. And so, yes, they had rehearsed it. I didn't personally know that, but other reporters, other folks have I think, pretty reliably reported that. At the moment, I have to say, the room exploded when Senator Bentsen came back with that answer. Just exploded, and Quayle had a very embarrassed look on his face. And you might think in that moment, well, there goes this election. This candidate, the senator from Indiana, he's been humiliated. But of course, a month later, George H.W. Bush and his running mate Dan Quayle were elected president and vice president, which is a humbling reminder that debates are not the end all and be all. They can make a difference. They do influence people's opinions, but they are not always determinative. In fact, they are often not determinative. So it was a reminder that, frankly, of how American politics can surprise us. And again, that no matter how much you think you know, there's a lot you just don't know about what's going on behind the scenes. Who knows? What if Dan Quayle hadn't said that? What if Lloyd Bentsen hadn't had the opportunity to use that comeback? What would have changed? But it was a moment I will never forget.
And one of my favorite sort of nuggets from this election cycle is that Dan Quayle is actually younger than both Biden and Trump. I mean, we're talking about an event that happened many years ago, and Quayle is still a spring chicken. No, I think he squeaks barely under there. But so, Judy, my question to you is, I mean, debates now are such hot topics, and the moderators and the rules. And are we even going to have debates in 2028 and beyond? What do you think is the future of presidential debates? Because it's been turned on its head, particularly this cycle.
Well, I hope so, because I do think the public needs to see these candidates in unscripted formats, and we need more of that. I think the more interviews they do, the more town halls they do where they take questions from voters, I think those are really valuable, those and debates. And I will tell you the format that I like for debates, I don't like these debates that are 60 seconds, 30 seconds, 45 seconds. I know the campaigns will insist on that because they don't want the debates to get out of control. But to me, the voters benefit the most when the candidates are allowed to argue it out or talk it out. Okay, say you're going to spend 15 or 20 minutes talking about the Israel-Gaza war. You're going to spend 15 or 20 minutes discussing immigration, rather than, okay, 60 seconds, 30 seconds, and then we have to move on to the next issue. I think the way debates have developed, it doesn't really serve the public well. You may get some great sound bites, a quick quip of somebody saying something that may make, a great little clip on social media, but I don't think the public benefits from that. And so my hope in the future is that we will see more unscripted exchanges. And I think candidates who don't allow themselves to be questioned by the press, questioned by the public, are not giving us the look that we need.
And what's your position on? I feel like now you're the candidate, Judy. I'm quizzing you now, on the role of the moderator, because how much the moderator should interject themselves into some of those specific policy questions and fact checking, all that. What's your assessment based on your experience?
Yeah, I feel very strongly, Nathan, that the moderator's role is to keep the candidates on course, to make sure they address the issue or the questions at hand, but essentially to stay out of the way. The moderator is not there to be the star of the show, to be the central figure in that debate. It's all about the candidates. But they do need to sometimes play a role of making sure the candidates answer the question. We know there's so many examples of you ask a question and they go off and they make it, and it's a talking point, or just a deliberate effort to duck the question. And in those instances, I think the moderator does have an obligation to go back and say, but Senator, Governor, whoever you are, what we just asked you, or what the voter just asked you was X. Could you please address that? And then I think it's up to the public to decide, if you try that a few times and they don't answer and it becomes very clear they're not going to answer, then I think it becomes clear to the public, to the people who are watching, listening, that they've ducked it. But I think that's an important role. Otherwise, I think it's just stay out of the way.
I think it was 2012, perhaps, or maybe 2016, where there was a specific one of the three presidential debates was the commander-in-chief debate, and they tried to make it a little bit more one issue. It was all about national security and foreign policy, and that gave the candidates a little bit more room to talk about those issues without feeling like there are 1,000 things at stake in a presidential election. And over the course of 90 minutes, 90 minutes divided by 1,000, you end up with only a couple seconds per item. I wonder if we do have presidential debates in the future, more specialized or conversations might be the most effective way of doing that.
I think that's a good idea if you have a guarantee that the candidates are going to participate in debates. As you know, it's become such a political football, if you want to call it that. I mean, with one candidate or another. Donald Trump started out the year, and President Biden and former President Trump started out with various times saying they would or wouldn't debate. And we've seen, that game played back and forth. It's become a game. The Commission on Presidential Debates this year been pushed out of the limelight because the candidates wanted to do their own negotiating with the television news organization. If you have a guarantee that there are going to be, say, 3 debates or even 2 between the candidates, this year we don't even have that. We have 1 debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. And I mean, I think the public would have been well served to have more than that. And I know there was 1 debate with President Biden, and then he dropped out. But I think the public deserves more than that, and I think and more town halls and all the rest of it. But I think your specific question about should they be in subject areas? Yes, if there's going to be more than one. I think if there's only 1 debate, I think you're going to need to ask questions across the spectrum. But I feel very strongly about what I said a moment ago about it's important to let the candidates talk it out, argue it out, if you will, with specific subject areas, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's the economy, taxes, healthcare. I think the public is better served by that format than these quick, let's move on, 60 seconds, 30 seconds.
And Judy, you're talking to 2 people who hope to be doing this for quite a while longer. But also at a time when trust in the media is not good, right? It's abysmal. What has been the key to maintaining a reputation for being professional and impartial and fair and in navigating this? What are the keys in your mind to that?
Well, thank you. I mean, I think that's actually a great compliment, and I appreciate it. I have to say that for me, I've simply followed the guidance that I was given in the very beginning. I started as a reporter way back in the 1970s as a local reporter covering Georgia politics and Atlanta city politics. And the guidance I was given by my producer was nobody gives a damn what Judy Woodruff thinks. We want you to go out there and cover the story, go to the state senate or state house, take notes, talk to people, get the story, bring it back, condense it. We can't put a 20-minute piece on the air, but give us 4 or 5 minutes. And that's what we want. We want your reporting. We don't want to know what your opinion is. And he was telling me this, I'm sure, because I had never studied journalism. I didn't go to journalism school. And he knew that I was a newbie, that I was just starting out. That guidance has stayed with me, and it sounds pretty simplistic, but I didn't come into journalism to express my view. It doesn't mean I don't have opinions. I'm a human being. I'm a woman, I'm a mother, I'm now a grandmother. I've been an Army brat. I mean, all those things inform who I am and my experiences. But I've worked really hard over my career to keep my personal views out of my reporting. Has it been perfect? No. We all know that journalists, by the selection of stories that we cover, I think for one thing, as more women came into political reporting, there's been more reporting on some issues that matter to more women, whether it's childcare, healthcare, things like that. But by and large, we have an obligation as reporters to serve the American people, and that means not to take sides. And I think there are a number of younger journalists coming into the profession right now who come in with the idea that they have some pretty strong views about different issues, and they want to make sure those issues get covered. And I agree that all these issues need to be covered, and we need to do it in as fair and open a way as possible. The difficult thing is, and I don't want to make this answer too long, is that there's so much now misinformation, disinformation that has found its way into our discourse and our reporting. Politicians are saying things that are flat out false and are looking us in the eye and saying things that are not true. And we have to figure out how to cover that. And I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that's easy. It's very, very difficult. It's much more difficult for me today to cover politics than it was when I started. At a time when I think most politicians adhered to a kind of unwritten set of rules that You wanted the news to be as favorable for you as possible, and you had your point of view, but you knew you couldn't get away with just constantly making it up. And I think today there are some of our elected political leaders, are making it up. And I think it makes it a lot harder for us as journalists, and we have to figure out how do we do our job and cover that and cover it fairly, and don't just basically become note takers. We have to be note takers, but we also have to provide some context at times. And I don't underestimate the difficulty of it for you in the younger generation who are going to be doing this for decades to come.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's hard when we can't agree on some basic information. As we've interviewed candidates, and back when I was interviewing candidates with Stu Rothenberg for many years, I never would have thought in those early days that who won an election would have been sort of a gotcha. That would be portrayed as some sort of gotcha question. But that's where we are. Judy, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. I know the country continues to benefit from your coverage, and younger journalists continue to benefit from your kindness and the example that you've set. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Nathan, and thank you, Jacob. I so appreciate the work both of you do. I read Inside Elections every time I get the new edition, and just am so pleased with what you've done and carrying on Stu Rothenberg's tradition. And I know this election's presenting many challenges, but I continue to rely on you and wish you guys the best.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I know Stu, if he could go back to joining you and Bernie on the Inside Politics set, he would do that in a heartbeat. Every day of the week, he would be on that set with you.
For sure.
Those were great moments. But thank you again, Judy. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now it's time for our final segment, Look What I Found. This is anything we've stumbled across in the past week that's interesting. It doesn't have to be political. It can be a TV show, an album, or something else entirely. You never know what you're going to get. Nathan, what did you find this week?
So I don't really watch reality TV. I'm not into Love is Blind, but I do have at least one questionable TV choice. And I found that I can't quit Hallmark Christmas movies. And right now, I watch a lot of TV through Sling, not sponsored yet, but there's a special thing. Anyway, their Hallmark Christmas movies are already on. And it's, I don't know, they're so formulaic. The acting is rough. It is, but you end up feeling good at the end. And when I'm working at night, when the kids are finally in bed, I need something on in the background, and the plots are not particularly difficult to understand. And so it's on in the background, and I don't know. I watch too many Hallmark Christmas movies. I confess on the podcast today.
Yeah. There's a great New York Magazine article about Rita Moreno and how she's found kind of a fifth career in her 90s as a kind of the grand dame of Hallmark Christmas movies. She loves doing them. She's kind of their big name star. That was pretty funny from probably a year or two ago.
It is a little bit jarring because there are a small pool of actors and actresses that are there, and so the characters are like, wait a minute, I thought this was this. That may be the most difficult thing about watching Hallmark Christmas movies. But Jacob, what did you find?
So I found the latest season of the Apple TV Plus show Slow Horses, which is adopted from one of my favorite book series, the Slough House series by British writer Mick Herron, about a group of allegedly incompetent spies in the UK who are, in fact, of course, very good at their jobs and just a little bit down on their luck. The show stars Gary Oldman and great ensemble cast. It just came out with its fourth season. Hugo Weaving plays the bad guy, and he's so good. I mean, he's good in everything he does. Lord of the Rings, The Matrix, whatever. But like he plays an American, which is a little, I guess Agent Smith was technically an American in The Matrix, but it is a little jarring to see him playing this like villainous role for the first time in several decades. And he leans into it. He hams it up. It's a great show. It's funny. It's violent. It's pretty exciting. So I'm looking forward to season 5, which they greenlit and I believe already have started shooting and putting together. And Slow Horses is the great show that comes out every year, which is not something that is normal in TV these days. I think that sometimes they'll make you wait 2, 3, 4 years for the next season, and they that Apple TV money, those checks clear, and they get the show out.
Well, that show sounds like similar content to Hallmark content. Maybe there could be like a crossover episode or series or something, but no, we'll see. I might leave that one to you. So
yeah,
and that's all the time we have. We walked through our latest rating changes, and we talked about covering elections, moderating debates, and anchoring election nights with the legendary Judy Woodruff. Thank you for joining us. At Inside Elections, we provide nonpartisan analysis of congressional, presidential, and gubernatorial races. With a combination of reporting and data, we break down the key races and bring valuable context to complex elections. Go to InsideElections.com to subscribe to the bi-weekly newsletter. We have individual subscriptions as well as group packages that are tailored for association and corporate PACs. If you like this episode, please subscribe to the podcast, rate us on your favorite platform. If you're watching on YouTube, feel free to leave a comment, click the thumbs up button, subscribe there as well. If you didn't like today's episode, please email Dan Quayle. We also want to thank our producers, Alan Tazinski and Melissa Lenner of Pretty Easy Podcasts, and our associate producer, Conrad Tolosa. Please come back and join us again next time.